Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we will try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles into different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the rising cost of education in India and its implications in the form of growing inequalities in access to quality education. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the Collegium System, its evolution, the associated challenges, and the way forward. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026, along with the value addition. So, stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the rising cost of education in India. We have the preamble to the Constitution of India, which talks about a very important value, a very important objective, and that is justice, social, economic, and political. And India being a welfare state, there are certain directives which are given to the state in the form of directive principles of state policy, which basically try to secure the socio-economic justice. In the original constitution, we had one of the very important directive in the form of Article 45, which talked about that the state shall strive to provide free and compulsory education to children under the age of 14 years of age. And it was in the year 2002 that we came up with the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, which basically converted this particular directive as a fundamental right in the form of Article 21 capital A, which says that the state shall provide free and compulsory education to children between the ages of 6 to 14 years of age. Now, the word which is used in this particular article is free and compulsory education. Free. Is it the reality? Because what the article says is that the reality is very much different. Now, we have a particular survey which has been carried out by NSS, which is the Comprehensive Modular Survey with respect to education. It points to certain very important realities. What it says is primarily 2 things. First, that the share of private schools in the overall school domain is increasing. And the second thing, the overall costs which are being incurred by the parents is also increasing, primarily because of these private schools. Now, if India is really a welfare state, this is something which is really concerning, because we have a lot of, in fact, a major chunk of the population which is in that lower rung of income distribution, and it is compromising the interest of that particular marginalized section. So what we'll do is we'll look at the gravity of the situation through this particular survey, and then we'll look at the kind of implications it has and what should be the way forward. See, primarily, why we are witnessing an increasing number of private schools is because low quality education is being provided in the government schools. So the parents have no option. See, understand, parents would never compromise on 2 things in life. Any parent. The very first thing is with respect to the education of the children, and the second is with respect to the health aspect of the family. So what they always try is to send their children and their wards to good schools where quality education can be provided. And an alternative which is emerging is that of the private schools. But it is draining a lot of their financial resources. Now, there are 2 things which you must keep in mind. First of all, it is a survey, right? Second thing, that there are a lot of data points in this particular article. The very purpose of this discussion is to make you understand the gravity of the issue, the seriousness of this particular concern, right? So you need not to memorize each and every data which is there, but I'll tell you in between that which all data points are important, and that can be used in the exam itself. I hope it is clear. So as I said, we have Article 21A, which primarily talks about the right to education, which says the state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children between the age of 6 to 14 years of age in such manner as the state may by law provide. So this is a fundamental right. And we have this particular survey. Now, that is how you also use the information primarily for the prelims aspect. So we have the National Statistics Office, which forms a part of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And this is the Comprehensive Modular Survey with respect to the education 2025, and the time duration is with respect to the April and June 2025. Now, since it is a survey, you'll have to understand that it does not give us the real picture. It gives us an indicative picture. That is one thing which is very important to understand. Second thing, let's talk about that what is the kind of magnitude of this particular survey. So it covered the villages and the rural areas and the urban blocks in the urban areas. How many households were covered? Almost 52,000 households were covered and a population of almost 2,21,000. Need not to memorize this. Now let's talk about the important points. So what it says, I'll talk this verbatim. Among the students enrolled in the school education, about 66% were enrolled in government schools and 33.9% were enrolled in other than the government schools in the rural India. So when we talk about the participation of children with respect to the kind of school, there is a dominance of the government school. Almost 66% of the students in the rural areas, they are going to the government schools. And 33.9, almost 34% are enrolled in the schools other than the government schools, right? When we talk about the urban India, 30.1% of the students were enrolled in the government schools and 70% were enrolled in schools other than the government schools. So the picture is skewed. In the rural areas, we have majority of the children going to government schools, and in the urban areas, we have majority of the children going to private schools. I hope it is clear. Now, this data is really important. If you look at the overall distribution, when we talk about the children, that how much of the children, what is the quantum of children who are going to government school? We have almost 55% and 11.3% with respect to the private aided and 31.9, almost 32% with respect to private unaided, right? Now, let's also look at this particular data point. Distribution of students currently enrolled in school education by type of school in rural areas. So we have almost 66% government schools, private aided 8.9%, private unaided 24.3%, right? So we have the share as almost 24% in rural areas. Need not to memorize this data. Then when we talk about the urban areas, we have government 30.1%. The share has drastically reduced as compared to that of the rural areas. And then if you look at private unaided, it's almost more than 50%. Again, need not to memorize. Now, when we talk about the rural versus urban divide, when we talk about the urban areas, 51% of the students are in the private schools. When we talk about the rural areas, only 24% of the students are in the private school. This also points towards the low income aspect in the rural areas. When we talk about the gender gap, we have boys as 34% and girls as almost 30% in the private school. So the gender gap is not too much, right? Now let's talk about the other things. Level-wise enrollment trends. Now when we talk about the rural private school share, see, we can basically break the school education into different compartments. We have the pre-primary, then the primary, the middle, secondary and senior secondary. Now, if you look at the private in the rural areas, what is the share of private schools? You will see that it is 28% at the pre-primary, and then it is 25%, then it's 21%, and higher secondary, it's 25%. When we look at the same picture with respect to the urban private schools, what we see is at the pre-primary, it's almost 63%, reduces to 55% at the primary, then 50% at the middle level, then 44%, and then 42%. What it shows, a very important trend, that as we increase the level of education, children basically opt for more of those institutions which are government based, right? So their share, the share of private schools subsequently reduces from that of the pre-primary to that of the senior secondary, right? Private enrollment declines with higher classes in urban India. Now, let's also look at this. In rural India, the average expenditure per student on school education during the current academic year, in the whole year, was estimated to be almost 2,640 rupees in government schools and almost 19,000 in non-government schools. In urban India, the same was estimated at 4,000 for the government schools and almost 31,000 for the non-government schools. Look at the difference. For the non-government schools, the prices are much, right? Again, need not to memorize this data. This is important. The average expenditure per student on school education in rural India was estimated at almost 8,382 rupees and 23,000 in urban India for all levels of enrollment and all types of school. So what we see that the expenses with respect to the education of the child or the ward, they are more in that of the urban areas and less in that of the rural areas. Now, again, if you look at the trends, what you will notice is that the share of private schools, it is increasing. Look at this, rising shift towards private schools. The last survey, if we compare the findings of the survey which was carried out in the year 2017 with that of this particular survey, we will see the rising share of private schools. This can be quoted in the answer, right? How? Compared to the NSS 75th round, we have between the time period 2017 and 18, rural primary private enrollment, it rose, it increased from that of 21% to that of 26%. Rural middle, again 16 to 21, rural secondary from 17 to 21, urban primary from 50 to 55. There has been an increase in both the rural as well as the urban areas with respect to the private schools. Urban middle from 41% to almost 50%. Higher private enrollment, what it implies is higher household expenditure and greater inequalities. Why? See, as I told you in the beginning, that parents would always try. For example, you are studying for the civil services. So the parents would always try to give you the best possible resources. So when we talk about this particular scenario at the school level, what we are finding is that more and more number of parents, they are tending to send their children to private schools, primarily because of the low quality of education which is being delivered in the government schools, even though it's a fundamental right. You talk about the free and compulsory education. But when we talk about what is being delivered in these public schools, in the government schools, it is of suboptimal quality because of the issues with respect to the infrastructure. The people-teacher ratio is not constant. It's not optimal. There are issues with respect to the absenteeism. Teachers are absent, right? Because they are government functionaries. So what the parents are doing is they are sending their children to the private schools. But since the overall cost with respect to the private schools is more than that of the government schools, they are incurring a more burden with respect to their overall finances. And that is compromising their investments in the other domain. Increasing expenditures in the education is compromising the investments in the other domain. That is what you'll have to understand. We also have a particular data point, right? So when we talk about, again, the picture with respect to the expenses, it is for the rural and the urban areas. You can look at this. What it says that the monthly household burden with respect to rural private schools, it varies for a parent. What is the kind of burden which they incur with respect to sending their children in a private school in rural areas? It is almost 1,500 to 2,800 rupees, right? Now, this is the monthly household burden. When we talk about the urban areas, it is almost from 2,100 to that of the 4,000. Now, what you'll have to understand, you'll have to correlate one set of data with this. We have the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation also coming up with the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey with respect to 2023 and 24. Now, what it tells us about the consumption patterns, how much of the money is flowing into the goods and services, different goods and services, the life standards, right, the living standards. So this is very important. If you compare this particular expense with respect to the education with the kind of data we have with respect to the household consumption expenditure survey, what you will see is that the cost of pre-primary private education, it is almost equivalent to monthly per capita expenditure of the poorest 5% household. Very important data. So if you look at the lowest 5% of the households in the country, whatever they are spending, total amount, it is equivalent to that of the pre-primary private education expenses. So the expenses are increasing. So just imagine the condition of these people at the lower rung. They'll not be even able to send their students, their children, to that of the private schools. So no option left. They'll have to send in the government schools. And over there are quality issues. Then again, cost of higher secondary education is almost equal to the monthly per capita expenditure of households in the third income decile. What it means? That if you look at the lowest 30% of the households with respect to the income, how much they are basically consuming, right? So the cost of higher secondary private education, it's almost equal to that of the 30% of the people in the lower rung of the consumption expenditure they incur. So it is a heavy burden on the pockets of these people. They'll not be able to afford private school education. Now, we are not saying that private school education must be provided. But what we are focusing upon, according to the authors, that the quality of education which is being provided in these government schools, it is suboptimal. And because of that, the parents are being forced to send their children in the private schools. And because of that, they're incurring a lot of expenses. One thing you'll have to understand, and this is with respect to the intergenerational poverty, intergenerational transfer of poverty. The concept is that of the intergenerational transfer of poverty and backwardness. These people who are earning less, who are spending less amount of money, they are unable to send their children to the private schools. So what would happen is that poverty would be transferred from one generation to the other. They would be kept in a vicious cycle of poverty because they do not have the adequate funds to basically make their children to go to the private schools. Whereas the other people, the rich people, especially in the rural areas and especially in the urban areas, they have a lot of options. And we'll talk about that, not just the private schools, rather they are also spending a lot of money when it comes to the private tuitions. So if we look at the proportion of students taking coaching, you will see that in the rural areas, almost 25% of the students are taking private tuitions. And this number is almost 30% for the urban areas. Now, what you'll have to understand, that as we go from the lower grades to the higher grades, from that of the pre-primary to that of the secondary or the senior secondary, the number of students who are going for private tuitions, it is increasing for private coaching, right? It is almost 10.7% in the rural areas for pre-primary student. They're also going for coaching. And then it increases to almost 36.7% with respect to secondary education. Then we talk about the urban areas, it is increasing from 13.6% to that of in the pre-primary to that of almost 45% in the higher secondary. Almost 45% of the children studying in the higher secondary, they are going for private tuitions. So the number is significantly increasing. This is an added burden, not just the expenses with respect to the private schools, but also the parents have to incur the added burden with respect to the private tuitions, right? Now, in many of the cases, what you will find is that these are the same teachers who teach in the school. They basically provide and deliver these private tuitions. Why can't they basically deliver the quality content in the school itself? And there are genuine reasons for that. Most of these teachers who work in the private schools, I'm talking about the private schools, they are on the contract basis. And again, they're basically underpaid. And because of that, they do not have any kind of incentive to basically provide the quality education. So what they do is they basically go with the private tuitions. And over there, they provide the quality education. But again, the people from the lower rung of the incomes, the poor households, they'll not be able to afford. And again, it would also enhance, as what I talked about, the intergenerational transfer of poverty and backwardness. I hope it is clear, right? Vicious cycle of poverty. Average expenditure in rural areas with respect to the coaching, it's almost 7,000, urban 13,000, need not to memorize. So as I said, by level, if you go at from one level to the other, it is keeping on increasing, right? Now, what are the reasons with respect to the high coaching demand? Let's first also talk about this. The average expenditure per student on private coaching during the current academic year for the whole year was estimated almost 2,400. The average expenditure per male, need not to go with this. So what we are trying to say is that first of all, that the number of private tuitions is increasing. The number of children who are basically enrolling in private tuitions is increasing. And also the costs are increasing. Now, what are the reasons for the higher coaching demand? The very first is higher income and better educated parents. See, parents, again the same reason. Parents would always want that their children or ward should get quality education. So in addition to whatever education the children are getting in the school, they want that there has to be a competitive edge which the children must develop. And for that, they're sending their children in these coaching institutes, right? In these private tuitions with respect to the school education. Then we have urban residents. What it means that there is the provision of quality education by these private tuitions. So in addition to sending their students, sending their children to the school, the parents also want that they should be provided with the quality education in these private tuitions. Then poor quality of school teaching, especially in private schools. As I told you the reason, they are on contract basis, they are underpaid. So they have no incentive to perform better. If they get the good amount of money in the school itself, why would they not give quality education, right? Coaching as a status symbol. This is also one thing. So as the incomes of the people increase, understand, their expenses with respect to their children on the education also increases. Even though the student may not be as meritorious or they might be mediocre, But again, the parents would always want that they should basically go to these private tuitions because it is a kind of a status symbol which has been developed in the society, which the article also talks about. Why private tuition is rising? Many private school teachers are underpaid and underqualified, leads to academic gaps, which families think that they can rely on the coaching aspect. So the gaps with respect to the understanding of different concepts. Many of the times what we see is that children go to the school, and in the school, in the classes, there are a lot of children. So teachers are unable to focus on each and every children. And because of that, there are gaps which develop in the understanding, in the concepts of these students. So as a result, what parents do is they send their children to these private institutes where individually on one-to-one basis, they are taught, right? Private schooling plus private tuition, it is a dual financial burden, especially for the poor income households, right? A 2024 study, which was published in the Journal of Development Studies, what it says, if there is better school quality, if the quality of education provided in the schools is better, it would automatically reduce the reliance of these children on the private tuitions. It would lower down the reliance. So this is something which you'll have to understand, and this can be a kind of a way forward, that if we improve on the quality terms, providing quality education. See, we have the national education policy, which also talks about providing quality education. We are trying to shift to a 5+3+3+4 system, right? So we have Article 21A, which basically gives importance to that of the children between the age of 6 to 14 years of age. But the NAP, in its effectivity, it has increased, it has extended this particular thing because it is focusing from the children of the age of 3 to 18 years of age. So we'll have to focus upon the quality aspect, and only then the reliance of people, the dependency of people on these private tuitions would reduce. I hope it is clear. So just get a grip over the broad data points, need not to memorize each and every point, right? Now, what are the implications? It creates growing inequality and financial stress for the household, especially in that lower rung of income distribution. The implication is we have constitutional promise versus ground reality. So the Article 21A promises free and compulsory education. But is that the reality? The answer is no. There is significant out-of-pocket expenditure in both the rural as well as the urban areas. The share of private schools is increasing in both the rural as well as the urban areas. The share of private tuitions is also increasing. Added burden on those households with low incomes. Then we have crowding out of public schools. Yes, if you'll have, understand, if you'll have even that lower income household, which primarily relies on the government schools, if even that particular household is more inclined to send the children in a private schools, he may incur a lot of burden, financial burden. But if he or she is ready to send the children to that of a private school, what would be the conditions of the public school? The political attention, the attention with respect to these public schools would even reduce further. And that would aggravate the quality of education which is being provided in these public institutions, public schools, right? Further reduce the funding and political attention. Increasing inequality. See, when we talk about the intergenerational transfer of poverty, what you'll have to understand, those households which are unable to send their children to private schools or private tuitions, they would be in constant trap of the vicious cycle of poverty. And this would further deepen the divisions in the society. Because the rich urban or rural households, they would be in a better position. And this would give a competitive advantage to their children. And then that would deepen the inequalities in the society. Access to quality learning. Then private schooling plus coaching creates unfair advantages for those living in, especially in the urban areas, right? So it is not something, see, we are a welfare state. So there has to be an equal importance given to the equity aspect, but we are unable to do so. Then we have decline in government school enrollment. Poor families, they are being forced to send their children into the private schools. At least they have a surety over there. At least there are accountability mechanisms which are there. So a person from a poor household, he'll not be in a position to go to a government school and ask the teachers that why you are not providing quality education to my children. But he'll be in a position to basically ask this particular question if his or her ward or children studies in a private educational institution, private school. So there are concerns, right? But if the person sends to a private school, sends his or her children in a private school, that would be an added burden, right? Threatens the principle of universal and equitable education, which is the core component of national education policy. We are focusing upon universalization of the secondary education by the year 2030. How can we realize this particular vision? And not just universalization, also maintaining the equity aspect. How can you imagine the conversion of this particular objective into reality? Then we have learning gaps. See, if the children are more inclined on these tuitions, then this would widen the learning inequalities. First of all, less number of people would be able to afford these private tuitions. And if more and more people are going to these private tuitions, what would happen is the quality in the schools, the quality which is being provided in the schools would reduce, be it the private schools or the government schools. So the learning outcomes would be compromised. We already know, we have the ASA report by NGO Pratham, which talks about the diminishing learning outcomes with respect to the students, especially at the grade of class 3rd and grade 5, right? Then we have shadow education system. This basically, in one way or the other, it is forcing the development of shadow education system in the form of these private tuitions and coachings, right? Then we have the regulatory and measurement gaps. We have the data right now which we are discussing, the National Sample Survey. It's a survey. We do not have robust data in place, the real-time data, though we have the UDI's platform. But again, the robust data is missing. That's the first aspect. Second, we are only focusing upon the monetary costs. What we have talked about, 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees with respect to the schools. We are not having a comprehensive look. The welfare cost, overall welfare cost, the opportunity cost. So we are not counting all other costs which are also being incurred by the parents. This is the deficit aspect. This is the negative aspect with respect to these surveys. What should be the way forward? Strengthening the publicly funded schools, especially in a country like India where we have a lot of income disparity. It becomes all the more important that we shift our focus to these public schools. Very important. Improve the overall functioning of the government schools. Focus upon the infrastructure. In some schools, there is even no provision of electricity. There are dark classes. You must have also seen the kind of centers sometimes we get through in the UPSC preliminary exam. Some of these government schools, they do not have the provision of basic electricity, water, toilets, infrastructure is missing. There is absenteeism, which is there. Teachers are absent. So how can we focus upon quality provision of education, right? So you'll have to focus upon having strict accountability mechanisms in these public schools. Reduce dependence with respect to shadow education. These private educations, private tuitions, how we can do so? There should be focus upon the remedial learning outcomes, remedial classes, especially for those students who have failed in particular subject or who are not performing effectively with respect to the learning outcomes. Remedial classes must be provided. How we can do so? We can go with the community learning centers. After school, community learning centers, use these words in your answers. There are many of the NGOs in the form of Teach for India. You must have heard about this. So there has to be adequate focus upon community learning centers so that they can focus upon the remedial education, right? Ensure that the constitutional promise, Article 21, free and equitable and universal education is provided in letter and spirit, not just in text, but also in its practical implementation. Then we have restore the confidence in the public schools. This is one of the core element. Why people are not really confident with respect to these public schools? Because they are not in a position to provide quality education. So even those households which are earning less, they are being compelled to send their children to private education, private schools. So we'll have to restore the confidence of the people. And how we can do so? If we have proper accountability mechanisms, proper disbursal of funds, there has to be a chain of command with respect to the disbursal of funds. Accountability mechanisms with respect to the teachers who are teaching in these schools. Then we have strengthening the foundational learning. Very important, as I talked about the ASA report. The foundational learning outcomes are very suboptimal when we talk about India. These children, the students in the grade 5, they're even unable to solve a basic arithmetic question with respect to grade 1. The SR report talks about that. So we have Nipun Bharat, which focuses upon the foundational numeracy and learning. That must be made more robust, right? Focus on teacher recruitment, training, and accountability. Teachers are the backbone of the overall education system. If we do not have those teachers who are unable to provide quality education, then the whole structure would collapse. So we'll have to effectively focus upon recruitment. There should be intensive recruitment drives. There are schools, but there are no teachers. Second, focus upon the training aspect. You must have heard about Nishtha. With respect to the training, Nishtha program, with respect to the training of teachers. So we have for example, the IGOT, Mission Karmyogi. Similarly, on the similar lines, we can basically come up with the online modules with respect to the training of these teachers, right? And accountability mechanisms, targeted subsidies and conditional cash transfers. So if in a particular area, we think that the provision with respect to the public education, public schools is not much and we cannot in the short term provide that, then why not go with the subsidies and conditional cash transfers to the parents so that they can have a kind of a voucher and they can redeem it and then they can send their children to these private schools, a voucher based scheme, right? Then monitoring and evidence system. Rather than focusing upon though these surveys provide us the crucial data, but we need to focus more upon the real time monitoring so that we get the real time data. I hope it is clear. See, again, if we have to really provide and realize the objectives which are enshrined in the national education policy, we'll have to first focus upon the public schools, the government schools, because they are the mainstay. They are the most important pillar with respect to the overall provision of the education, right? And therefore, only then we'll be able to realize the objective of universalization and equity in the school education. Let's have a mains practice question. The NSS 80th round reveals a sharp rise in the household expenditure on basic schooling. This trend poses serious implications for equity and the right to education. Discuss the implications of rising costs of basic education in India. Suggest policy measures to ensure affordability and equitable access to quality schooling. Again, a point of importance, do not focus too much upon the data, but those 2-3 important data points which you can cite in the answers, please do that. And do write the answer. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the Collegium System. So first of all, in simple terms, what do we mean by Collegium System? This is a mechanism where judges themselves appoint and transfer the judges of the higher judiciary, including that of the Supreme Court and the High Courts. So what we are trying to say is that this is a protected mechanism where the executive and the legislature has no role with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges. This is what the Collegium is all about. Now, what is the context of this particular article? Understand. We have a particular judge in Madras High Court and she is third in the seniority. In October, an order was basically passed by the higher judiciary and she was then said that you are transferred to Kerala High Court. But she did not join. Now, in November, there was a kind of a collegium which was set up and it recommended some names with respect to the appointment to the Madras High Court. But unfortunately, she being the third senior judge in the Madras High Court, ideally she should have been a part of that 3-member collegium in Madras High Court. But she was not made a member of that collegium. Instead, a junior judge was made a member of the collegium itself. Therefore, Tamil Nadu government has basically questioned this thing, the procedural aspect, that what is the basis that you did not include Justice Nisha Banu as a member of the collegium. So this points towards the issues in the overall functioning of the collegium system. Very important part of GS2 judiciary. Now, as I told you the context, on November 9th, 2025, Madras High Court Collegium, it recommended 6 district judges and it elevated for the position of the High Court judges. The Tamil Nadu government has questioned this particular thing, not on the kind of recommendations which the collegium has given, but on the basis of the procedural aspect, that why the third most senior judge in the Madras High Court, Justice Nisha Banu, was not included as a part of the collegium. Ideally, she should have been made a part of the collegium itself. did not question the merit but raised a procedural query regarding the constitution of the Collegium of Madras High Court. The Collegium excluded her and included a junior judge, Justice M.S. Ramesh. So let's first talk about that what do we mean by Collegium system. As I told you in the beginning, it's a judicial mechanism which talks about the appointment and transfer of the judges of the high judiciary. High judiciary means Supreme Court and different high courts. Now, see, is it something which is mentioned in the Constitution? The answer is a plain no. The Collegium system is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. It has evolved through various verdicts of the Supreme Court, through what we call as the three judges case. There are three cases which have different cases, and that is on that basis we have had the evolution of the Collegium system, right? There is no direct constitutional provision which talks about the Collegium system. It has evolved from the landmark SC judgment, Supreme Court judgment. Now, see, before that, you'll have to first understand what Article 124, Subclause 4 and Article 217 talk about. So when we talk about the constitutional provision, what it says that the Supreme Court judge, we're talking about Article 124, should be appointed by the President after consultation. Please give importance. This is a very important word. With the such judges of the High Court and the Supreme Court as the President may deem necessary. The CJI, the Chief Justice of India, is to be consulted in all appointments except his or her own. So the importance is given to the word consultation. Article 217, which deals with the High Court. The High Court judges should be appointed by the President after consultation with the Chief Justice of India and the Governor of the state. The Chief Justice of the High Court concerned should also be consulted. Now, the word which is to be given importance is consultation. It has been the interpretation of this particular word, consultation, which has led to the primacy of the judiciary with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges. So it was a very first case, first judge's case, what we often call as the S.P. Gupta case versus Union of India. In this particular case, what the Supreme Court said, that the word consultation does not mean concurrence. That is, you need not to agree with us. The executive, if it has cogent reasons, it can deny our recommendations. So it primarily gave the executive a dominance with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges for the next 12 years. Then came the second judge's case, which of 1993, also known as the Supreme Court Advocates on Record Association versus Union of India. In this particular case, Supreme Court primarily said two things. First, what it said, कि भाई consultation जो है, it is basically the concurrence. Whatever we would say, you will have to agree. You cannot deny that, right? Second thing, the consultation does not just mean the views of the Chief Justice of India. It should include CJI plus the two senior most judges of the Supreme Court. So the CJI, before he gives the recommendation to the executive, he must consult with the two senior judges. Then we had the third judge's case of 1998. It was basically on the basis of a presidential reference under Article 143. You must be knowing about presidential reference. It was recently in the news, where the ambit of the discussion was enhanced. That is what the Supreme Court said, that the Collegium system now comprises, with respect to the Supreme Court, the CJI and four senior most judges. The Chief Justice of India and the four senior most judges. So in total, it's a 5-membered body. What is the Collegium for a High Court? It is the Chief Justice of that particular concerned High Court and the two senior most judges. I hope it is clear. So this gives the judiciary complete power to decide the appointments and transfer of judges with respect to higher judiciary. That is what you'll have to understand. Now, why this is important? Because see, you must have heard about a lot of points against Collegium system, but why this is really important? See, we have the concept of separation of powers. We have three organs, judiciary, executive, legislature. So in order to completely exercise the powers, there has to be a kind of a barrier. The executive should not impinge upon the decisions of the judiciary. And if the executive does so, let's imagine a scenario where the executive has a lot of say with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges. That would compromise the quality of the verdicts which is being delivered. Right? They would act with a kind of a fear or favor, the judges. So therefore, in order to make sure that these judges perform their duties with no fear or favor, with no influence of the executive. This is very important. Then we have preservation of judicial integrity. We have senior judges, right? They're unelected, definitely, but they have a lot of experience with respect to the jurisprudence, the legal acumen. So they are best placed to decide that what kind of judges should join the higher judiciary. It would preserve the integrity and dignity of the higher judiciary. These are the 2 points. We also have Article 50, which talks about the separation of power. But the concern is, what are the issues? And there are serious issues with respect to the functioning of collegium. First of all, there is exclusion of the executive. We have the executive chosen by the people. So executive fulfills the mandate of the people. But you are not including the executive in the decision making with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges. So what it would lead to is a kind of a decision making which is in favor of the judiciary, in favor of the judges. So there cannot be complete exclusion. And if because of that, what is happening is that there is no accountability. Judges can refer anyone. There are no criterias and benchmarks which are mentioned. Certain criterias and benchmarks are mentioned in the memorandum of procedure. But again, whether they are followed in letter and spirit, that is a question. Next, we have favoritism and nepotism. There's a very important word quite frequently used, which is the uncle judge syndrome. There have been cases where a lot of near and dear ones of these judges have been appointed to higher judiciary. So this points towards the issue of favoritism and nepotism. The whole mechanism with respect to the appointment is very non-transparent. So the minutes of the meeting, the discussions which take place, they're not published. Even though the Supreme Court is taking a lot of steps, but still there is a complete veil of secrecy. There's a complete curtain which is there with respect to the decision making, the points which are being considered by the collegium, on what basis you are taking a decision. Then we have against the principles of checks and balance. Yes, India does not follow a very rigid separation of power. What we follow is a checks and balance, where every institution, every organ of the state is partially independent. If one organ of the state, be it legislature or executive or judiciary, if it oversteps, we'll have the other organs of the state trying to control it. That is what the mechanism of checks and balance is. But if the judges have all the complete power with respect to the appointment and transfer, so this is hampering the principle of checks and balance, right? Next, we have closed door mechanism. Everything is in secrecy. Whatever, there's no permanent secretariat which is there. So there are issues. Then no provision for reservation. Very important. If you look at the number of people from the marginalized communities in the higher judiciary, it's very minuscule. We have the aspects of affirmative action in the government jobs, but there are no provisions with respect to the appointment of judges when we talk about the affirmative action. And that's the reason very few people from the marginalized communities, be it the SCs, STs and OBCs, they are there in the higher judiciary. Then we have unequal representation. When we talk about the unequal, I'm primarily talking about in the context of the women judges. We already know what is the state of participation of the women judges. It's almost negligent. It's almost minuscule. So, because, see, and this has been a point which Justice Indu Malhotra also talked about, where she said that when we talk about the memorandum of procedure, when you're talking about the benchmarks, the criterias, why are you not considering gender as a criteria? That has to be considered. So these are some of the issues. Now, what should be the way forward? The way forward should be in terms of a permanent and independent body. Has to be created. See, we had the 4th judges case in which the NJAC, I did not talk about here. So we had the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. And also the NJC, National Judicial Appointments Commission Act of 2014. It was also struck down, saying that this particular commission, since it had participants from the executive with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges, it impinges on the freedom or the independence of the judiciary. So, but what you'll have to understand, there cannot be a kind of a scenario where we can continue this thing for forever. We'll have to come up with a mechanism where the independence of judiciary is balanced with the accountability aspect. So there has to be a balance between independence and accountability. Then adequate focus must be on the inclusivity aspect. We need to make sure that there is a greater participation of the judges from the marginalized sections, be it the SC, SCs, OBCs, and including the women, right? Then best practices. For example, in the US, we have the US president who appoints the judges to the higher judiciary, and the Senate agrees on that, ratifies that. For example, in the UK, we have the selection commission. So why not come or adopt some of these best practices? So again, understand, see, Collegium system till now, it has always tried to secure the independence of the judiciary. And definitely the Supreme Court especially, it has given a lot of verdicts in which it has basically stopped the executive from its excesses. But what you'll have to understand, there has to be a mechanism where the will of the executive must also be incorporated. But to an extent, not to an extent that it compromises the justice aspect of the higher judiciary. I hope it is clear. Let's have a mains practice question, a simple question. The Collegium system in India, which has evolved through various Supreme Court verdicts, is plagued with certain core issues. Discuss these issues and suggest a way forward. Simple question, 10 mark it, 150 words, please do write. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the United Nations Environment Assembly. Now, this is the highest decision-making body with respect to the environment aspect. So, the 7th session of the UNEA is being conducted in Nairobi, Kenya. So we have the Minister of State for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who is basically putting forward India's voice. What he is trying to focus upon is the adequate access to technology and finances, especially for the developing countries, in order to deal with the adaptation and mitigation aspect of climate change. Stressing on the importance of accessible finance and technology transfer, India said on Thursday at the plenary of the United Nations Environment Assembly's 7th session that the outcome of the conference should aim to complement the existing multilateral agreements and should be implementable for all the member states. And if it has to be implementable for all the member states, adequate provision for technology and finances must be there. The UNEA, and that is how you use the information, it itself tells you that what UNEA is all about. The UNEA is the world's apex, the top decision-making body on the environmental matters, consisting of all the UN member states. So if there is a statement that the UNEA comprises of only some members of the UN, it's wrong. It comprises all the members of the United Nations. And the 7th session theme is Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet. Note this particular theme because sometimes themes have also been asked. India approaches, the Minister of State has said, India approaches the UNEA 7 with the conviction that environmental solutions must remain centered on people and global action must be guided by the principle of CBDR-RC. Common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. What it means. The ill effects of climate change, which we are witnessing right now, it's primarily because of the anthropogenic reasons, human-induced reasons. But are the developing countries or the least developed countries primarily responsible for that? The answer is no. Because the ill effects of the climate change, which we are witnessing now, most of it is because of the kind of developmental models which developed countries have followed. So it's primarily their responsibility. So that is, we have a common objective to mitigate the ill effects of climate change. But the responsibility has to be differentiated. Who has polluted the most? Who has led to the rise in the average temperatures? Those people must be held accountable, right? And respective capabilities. On the basis of the capabilities of different countries, the kind of implementation, the kind of the norms which they can set, the kind of things which they can do with respect to mitigating the ill effects of climate change, that has to be based on the respective capabilities of that particular state, that particular country. The principle of CBDR-RC refers to the responsibilities of nations to fight the climate change in proportion to their historic contributions in emitting planet-warming greenhouse gases. So, if we look at our contribution with respect to the overall greenhouse gases, it's still very less as compared to the countries like US or the European countries, right? Then we have the flagship, and the minister has also talked about the kind of initiatives which India has been taking, and these are important. We'll also talk about them. India's flagship initiatives to combat the environmental degradation and climate change, such as achieving 50% non-fossil fuel installed electricity capacity, one of the very important targets of the NDC's nationally determined contributions, and Panchamrit. Then we have the energy transitions actions, and then transition actions means that is you are converting the energy supplies from that of the fossil fuel base to that of the renewable energy technologies, RETs, and afforestation initiatives. Internationally, the minister said, India continues to advance the collective action through the International Solar Alliance. Very important. Tell me the headquarters, where they are situated, of the ISA. The Global Biofuels Alliance, we'll talk about it. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, and the International Big Cat Alliance, India's initiative, alongside several other knowledge and capacity sharing initiatives. The Global Environment Outlook. There have been many questions which UPSC has asked with respect to who publishes these reports. So the Global Environment Outlook is published by UNEP. Remember that, right? Report warned that despite the global efforts and calls for action, the planet has already altered into an uncharted territory, that we are witnessing unsustainable models of development. It said that the rate of global warming is likely to be higher than that of the central estimates of previous projections by the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, increasing the risk of irreversibly passing several climate tipping points in the next few decades. That is, what are these climate tipping points? That once you cross them, then it is irreversible. Irreparable damage has already been done. You cannot recover that, right? There are different climate tipping points. Give some example in the comments. These will manifest through the shifts in the ocean circulations, accelerated ice sheet loss, the examples are here, and widespread thawing, melting of glaciated earth or permafrost. So this is what you have to understand. Let's talk about, I have taken the snippets from the website itself. This also tells you the importance of the original content, right? The United Nations Environment Assembly is the world's highest decision-making body for the matters related to the environment, with a universal membership of 193 member states. All the members of the UN are a party to this particular UNEA. It says the Global Environment Agenda provides the overarching policy guidance and defines the policy responses to address the emerging environmental challenges. It undertakes policy reviews, dialogue, and the exchange of experiences, sets the strategic guidance for the future direction of the UNEP, and fosters partnership for achieving environment goals and resource mobilization. The 7th session of the UNEA is being held in Nairobi, Kenya. Remember this, it can be asked. And also, one important thing which you have understood from this particular thing is that the headquarters of UNEP are itself in Nairobi, Kenya. Okay, let's talk about the Global Biofuels Alliance. The Global Biofuels Alliance was launched by Honorable Prime Minister along with the leaders of US, Brazil, Italy, Argentina, Singapore, and other countries on the sidelines of the G20 summit in 2023. Global Biofuels Alliance. What it does? It is a multi-stakeholder alliance of government, international organizations, industries. So this is not just an initiative of the governments. Rather, it is a multi-stakeholder alliance, bringing together the biggest consumers and producers of biofuels. GBA is intended to facilitate the capacity building exercises, technical support for national programs, policy lessons sharing, technology advancement and implementation of internationally recognized standards and codes through participation of a wide spectrum of stakeholders, primarily to facilitate the productive development of biofuels, right, with the help of technology and sustainable aspects, right? This is what you have to understand. Now, let's also talk about the International Big Cat Alliance. The Union Cabinet, chaired by Prime Minister, approved the establishment of International Big Cat Alliance with headquarters in India with a one-time budgetary support of almost 150 crores. What are big cats? These includes tiger, lion, leopard, snow leopard, puma, jaguar, and cheetah. Remember this. This can be asked in the prelims. Out of these, 5 big cats are found in India. Which are these 5? Just have a look. Tiger, lion, leopard, snow leopard, and cheetah. The International Big Cat Alliance, conceived as a multi-country, multi-agency coalition of 96 big cat countries, non-range countries interested in big cat conservation. So not just those countries which have a range of these big cats, but also the other countries who have an interest in the conservation. Conservation partners and scientific organizations working in the field of big cat conservation, besides business groups, corporates willing to contribute to the cause of the big cats, to establish network and develop synergies in focused manner so as to bring common platform of a centralized repository of successful practices and personnel, backed by financial support which can be leveraged to strengthen the conservation agenda with respect to these big cats. Indian initiative. So this is what you have to understand with respect to this particular article. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, here is a mention of some of the very important recommendations of the Parliamentary Committee on Public Undertakings. So what it has said is that India, as of now, it relies heavily with respect to the import of crude oil. More than 85% of our overall need with respect to the crude oil, they are primarily done with the help of these imports. So we need to basically go with the source diversification. Important. And we'll also talk about the petroleum industry, right? The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas should work closely with the Ministry of External Affairs and other concerned government agencies to boost diplomatic engagement with oil producing countries, for example, Saudi, UAE, secure favorable investment terms, and address tax and regulatory hurdles faced by public sector enterprises. So we have some of these PSUs, and they are facing issues with respect to having interactions with the other countries. So what the committee has recommended is that these regulatory hurdles must be improved. The Parliamentary Committee on Public Undertakings has said, the need for diversification of crude oil sources, the committee observed, notwithstanding the proactive efforts being made in this regard, challenges persist due to sanctions, financial market volatility, and regulatory changes in host countries. We were buying a lot of Russian oil, but because of the pressures from the US, from President Trump, because of the sanctions which have been imposed, the supply has been reduced. So there is a kind of volatility in the market. It is not something which is based on stability. So we'll have to come up with our own steps. According to the committee, India imports more than 89% of the domestic crude oil requirements. You can use in your answers, you can cite that according to the Parliamentary Committee on Public Sector Undertakings, India imports more than 89%. That adds credibility to your answer. And I always say this to aspirants. Whenever you are quoting a data point, make sure first of all it is authentic, and also try to cite the data source, right? Recent global events like Russia-Ukraine conflict and tensions in the Middle East have underscored the vulnerability of India's supply chain, energy supply chain, and its dependence on international trade flows. To this effect, it recommended intensifying efforts towards diversification of sources both geographically and contractually. Why we should only be dependent upon the geographical countries, these countries of Middle East? Why we cannot basically have more contracts with countries like Venezuela, or let's say the US, right? Or other Latin American countries who have a lot of oil, or even Southeast Asian countries. Risk management practices as hedging and flexible term contracts, and enhancing alternate import routes among the other suggestions. These are the suggestions which have been given by the committee. Let's talk about the petroleum industry. India's petroleum industry, now this I have taken from the PIB, very, very important points. Though we import a lot of crude oil, we are one of the largest refiners in the world. We refine a lot of these crude oil. India's petroleum industry is a comprehensive sector encompassing the exploration, production, refining, distribution, and marketing of petroleum and its byproduct. For example, we have the different byproducts in the form of ATF and other things, aviation turbine fuel. It includes the upstream activities like extraction of crude oil and natural gas, midstream activities such as transportation and storage. We have a lot of pipelines which follow. And then we have downstream processes including the refining and distillation of fuels like petroleum, diesel, LPG, kerosene. A critical contributor to India's energy basket, the petroleum industry ensures energy security and underpins at the base various economic activities. At present, India has 19 public sector undertakings, 3 private sector refineries, and 1 joint venture refinery. The country's refining capacity has increased from 215 million metric tons per annum in April 2014 to almost 256.8 million metric tons per annum in 2024. So we are increasing the refining capacity. Foreign trade of petroleum. India has witnessed a remarkable surge in the petroleum exports. We have some of the products which are being exported because we import a lot of crude oil. Then we basically refine it, and then a lot of these refined products, they are exported. Over the last decade, the country's refining capacity now exceeds 250 million metric tons per annum, has enabled to cater to the global markets. Key export destinations are South Asian countries, African, European countries. The government's emphasis on the export-oriented and establishing special economic zones for refineries have further boosted this particular trend. Share in the GDP, as per the information provided by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, the gross value addition of manufacture of coke and refined petroleum products has increased from 1.56 lakh crores in 12-13 to 2.12 lakh crores in 2022-23. So a substantial portion is being contributed to the gross value addition with respect to the refining of these products. Global ranking in refining and supply. India ranks among the top 5 refining nations globally. So you might confuse because India imports a lot of crude oil. We might have this, we also import the refined products. No, India is one of the largest refiners in the world. Do remember. Thanks to the robust infrastructure and strategic geographic locations, the country is the 7th largest exporter of refined petroleum products. Facilities like Jamnagar refinery in Gujarat, one of the world's largest, underscore India's dominance in the refining sector. This global standing enhances India's energy security and positions as a key player in international energy markets. International Energy Agency in February 2024 assessed that India will become the largest source of global oil demand growth. And now, and 2030, India is the second largest economy in biofuel blending, following Brazil. Second largest with respect to biofuel blending. You can also just look at this. This is the India's position with respect to different parameters. With respect to the export of refined products, it stands at 7th position. Now, this is again very important. What have been the government initiatives? We have Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana supporting bioethanol projects such as second generation and third generation plants for sustainable fuel production. Then we have strategic petroleum reserves, SPRs, right? And enhancing the energy security through storage facilities. We have 3 underground storage facilities in Visakhapatnam, Mangalore and Padur in Karnataka with a total capacity of almost 5.33 million metric tons. Then ethanol blending program, we already know that. City gas distribution network expansion, expanding the piped natural gas and compressed natural gas infrastructure by covering 733 districts in 34 states and UTs. Energy security initiatives, investing in overseas exploration and acquisition of oil blocks. Co-development, co-production. Moving towards greener fuels, Satat initiative, sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. The Satat initiative invites potential investors to set up compressed biogas production plants. Use these, always remember these keywords so that if you have a question in the prelims, you can easily identify the correct option. This aims to make better use of agriculture residue, cattle dung, municipal solid waste and provide farmers with an additional source of income. Mission Green Hydrogen, we all know that we have been focusing on green hydrogen, promoting green hydrogen production to reduce the carbon footprint. Then National Bioenergy Program, focus upon the bioenergy production and reducing waste. Hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy, help with respect to the exploration aspect, encouraging the private investment in exploration and production of these hydrocarbons. So this is what you have to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the narco tests. So the Supreme Court has very categorically said once again that involuntary or forced narco tests, they cannot be allowed. The Supreme Court has held that any forced or involuntary narco test shall be unconstitutional and invalid, setting aside the Patna High Court order that permitted such a test in Amlesh Kumar versus State of Bihar. So in this particular case, the Patna High Court basically said that the involuntary or forced narco tests can be done, but now the Supreme Court has set aside this particular thing. The apex court is of the view that the High Court's order was in contravention, was in opposition, was an antagonism to that of the guidelines which were issued in the Selvi versus State of Karnataka in 2010. First of all, what is a narco test? A narco test is a process of investigation during which it is expected that the accused undergoing the test would express some facts which he or she in active state would not express, right? He is sedated by administering certain classes of substances such as barbiturates, for instance, sodium pentothal, right? So this is a chemical which sedates people to reduce subjects' inhibitions and reasoning ability. So over here, a person cannot lie, because for lying, you'll have to consciously lie, right? But once a person is administered these drugs, the ability to consciously lie, it gets reduced, the inhibitions reduces, and therefore, person is more inclined to speak the truth. It's a non-violent method similar to that of the polygraphs and brain mapping. We'll talk about it. Why these tests are constitutionally problematic. Clause 3 of Article 20, right? It says, provides for the protection against self-incrimination. You cannot be compelled to give evidence against yourself, meaning that no person accused of any offense shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. The Supreme Court, while referring to the Selvi guidelines, has held that without free consent, any such test would be unconstitutional and hence cannot be allowed. And therefore, whatever the information you obtain, that cannot be used as an evidence, right? Because this is forced. It is important to note that all the 3 clauses of Article 20 form the constitutional foundation of India's criminal justice system. Very, very important. See, whenever we talk about these things, understand, they apply to the protections which are provided in Article 20, they apply to criminal matters, right? We have clause 1 which talks about the ex post facto law, laws that declare an act as an offense, which when committed was not an offense. There cannot be no ex post facto criminal law. If a person has done a particular crime today, done an act today, which is not a crime, you cannot basically prosecute that individual. The person can only be prosecuted if you have a particular criminal law which prescribes or which basically prescribes that this is a particular crime, right? Further, clause 2 states that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. No double jeopardy. That is protection against double jeopardy. Clause 3, as I discussed earlier, protects an accused from self-incrimination. No one can be compelled to be an evidence, a witness against himself. One of the principles of a democratic criminal justice system is the need to balance the rights of the victim with those of the accused. See, in a robust criminal justice system, what you have to understand is that you'll give equal opportunity to both the person, the victim, and the accused, right? Personal liberty under Article 21 is of paramount importance because it incorporates right to privacy, and these tests are intruding into the privacy aspects, and any such test without the express consent of the person would violate one of the most basic human rights. Also, we have the golden triangle. We have Article 14, 19 and 21. Article 21 read with Article 19 and 14. Equality before law and equal protection of laws, Article 14. And then we have certain freedom, for example, freedom of speech and expression, which are enshrined, of assembly, of occupation in Article 19. Golden triangle of the Constitution as explained in the Supreme Court in Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India. It means that violation of the right to privacy would thereby violate the right to life and personal liberty. And finally, the golden triangle also. What have the courts said about the evidentiary value? Two more cases appear relevant in this regard in Manoj Kumar Saini versus State of MP in 2023 and Vinobhai versus State of Kerala in 2025. The courts held that results of narco tests do not confirm guilt. Although the information obtained from the test might contribute to the investigation aspect, it must be corroborated. It must be basically strengthened with the other facts, with other evidence. The Supreme Court has held that consent must be informed, recorded before a magistrate, and undertaken with medical, legal, and procedural safeguards. Article 21, which talks about the procedure established by law. The overall ambit was enhanced in the Maneka Gandhi case, where the due process of law was also incorporated, which signifies that procedure providing the law shall be fair. All procedural safeguards shall be taken care before conducting any such non-invasive tests. The principle underlying the informed consent is individual autonomy. If you are basically carrying out tests on a person, the consent is of utmost importance. That is what you'll have to understand, which is associated with the concept of natural justice. Enlightenment thinker Immanuel Kant, the ethics aspect, said that an act is ethical only when performed with the consent. In this context, forced or involuntary testing violates the ethical principles as well as the core human and natural values. But what you'll have to understand is when it comes to the national security aspects, we have a lot of provisions and clauses which basically allow that in one way or the other. Then Article 20, we have already discussed that. Let's talk about these things. What is polygraph and what is brain mapping? See, polygraph or a lie detector, in simple terms, you call the polygraph test as lie detector, continues to be used by law enforcement and government agencies for various screenings, even though most criminal courts ban polygraph evidence. Supporters claim that it has almost 85 to 95% accuracy rate. You must be aware that this was done in case of Kasab, in the heinous kind of or cowardly attacks by the terrorists in the 26/11 in Mumbai. Critics say that not enough scientific evidence to say whether it detects lies or not. What a polygraph measures? It measures body movements, breathing, perspiration, pulse, blood pressure. How it works? Sensors measure the body changes as subject answers yes, no questions. Blood pressure cuff records the pulse, blood pressure. Rubber tubes placed on the chest and abdomen record the breathing. Two metal plates attached to the fingers record sweating. So this is on these basis, we can basically come to the conclusion. We can have an idea whether the person is lying or not. Then we have the brain mapping. In brain mapping, we have the subject, the person is made to wear a headband with sensors to measure the electrical brain responses on various aspects of the case. Brain mapping doesn't need any chemicals, drugs to be injected. It's non-invasive. Court permission and subjects not needed. So again, consent is very much required. A brain fingerprinting device which uses EEG, which is electroencephalogram, is deployed to study the electrical behavior of the human brain, including the experience of a crime, knowledge and involvement of a person. So on that basis, we can have assumptions whether the person has really done the crime or not. This is what you'll have to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, here is a mention of one of the very important maritime zones, which is exclusive economic zone. So we have the Coast Guard, Indian Coast Guard, which has intercepted a Pakistani boat. The Coast Guard has detained a Pakistani fishing vessel found operating inside India's maritime limits and taken 11 members into custody. The Coast Guard intercepted the boat on Wednesday inside India's exclusive economic zone. We'll talk about it. The operation reflects the fort's maritime patrol efforts and India's commitment to safeguarding its borders while adhering to the international maritime regulations. Also, you must know that in the Indian Ocean region, we are coming up with the Mahasagar, mutual and holistic advancement of security and growth for all in the region, right? Remember this. Now, when we talk about these contiguous zones, they are first of all in line with the recommendations of UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. So how to basically decide that what is this particular zone all about? So from the very baseline, the very boundary, we have 12 nautical miles, and this is the region which is known as the territorial sea. Over here, the country has a sovereign right over the bottom of the ocean, the surface, and the airspace. That is what you'll have to understand. Then there is a contiguous zone of another 12 nautical miles. So if you look at from the baseline, it is almost 24 nautical miles. Over here, the country has no sovereign right over the airspace, but it has right over the bottom of the ocean and the surface of the ocean. Then we have the exclusive economic zone, where the country can secure rights to exploit the mineral resources on the surface of this particular ocean in concurrence with the International Seabed Authority. Right? Do read about it. The International Seabed Authority. Exclusive economic zone. So it is the exclusive economic zone where the safe passage of the international freights or fleets is allowed. But again, if they pose a security threat, then that can be basically captured by the Coast Guard or the Navy, which has been done in this particular case. This is what you have to understand. Again, important thing is that the national airspace is from the baseline till 12 nautical miles and then starts the international airspace. Right? But when we talk about the contiguous zone, it extends till 24 nautical miles. I hope it is clear. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the AI deployment in India. So the head of Microsoft has announced an investment of almost $17.4 billion in the few years in the AI deployment. There's a great momentum in India in terms of artificial intelligence and agentic AI applications. Mr. Nadella, the head of Microsoft, delivered the keynote address as a part of AI tour in India, which began in New Delhi 2 days ago with an announcement of almost $17.5 billion investment in India. Now, what is the difference between traditional AI and agentic AI? See, it's very simple. When we talk about traditional AI, for example, you're using ChatGPT, you give a prompt to it that give me information with respect to this, right? Or you seek some advices. So on the basis of the prompt, it is giving you the information. So you are basically asking certain information and it is providing. When we talk about the agentic AI, it is the next step, the next frontier, where it is performing autonomously. You are not guiding the system. Let's imagine a setup which is a kind of an environment which is primarily giving boost to that of the cyber security aspect. Let's say if someone's password is weak, and then if that can be hacked, then the agentic AI, what it would do is that it would reset the password automatically. So it is on its own performing certain tasks in the supply chains without the interference of the humans. That is the next frontier, the next boundary, or the next aspect, next stage of development with respect to the AI. Traditional AI requires the prompts from the humans and or explicitly programmed rules. Agentic AI takes actions to achieve a defined outcome, often without the direct human input. So we have certain very highly intensive bots, financial bots, which on their own at certain period of times, they would provide you the advice. You're not asking, but they would provide at that particular point of time at which the machine thinks that the advice should be given. So this is autonomous, more autonomous. When we talk about agentic AI, generative AI, and traditional AI, let's compare. Primary function, agentic AI, goals-oriented action and decision-making. Generative AI, content generation. Traditional AI focus on automating the repetitive tasks, the routine tasks. Autonomy, there is a lot of autonomy which is there in the agentic AI. High, it operates with the minimal human oversight. Variable, may require user prompts. And with respect to the autonomy, it's quite low because it requires human interventions, specific algorithms. Learning, reinforced learning. On the basis of the advices it would give you, on the study it would do, it would reinforce it. And therefore, it would be more capable to give you the advices, become more capable. Improves through the experience, data-driven learning. When we talk about the generative AI, learns from the existing data. Traditional AI relies on predefined rules and human interventions. So as we go from traditional to generative to agentic, the intensification of the technology, the autonomy with which the system is working, it enhances. That is what you'll have to understand. So here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope you really liked it. All the very best. Thank you.